glad to be here. And our farm is in northern Chickasaw County, and I farmed for about 43 years, and about half of that's been organic. We've been certified organic entirely since about year 2000. So I want to tell you about what my experiences have been and how this weed's affected our farm, affected our crop rotation. And I would have to say, after 40 years of farming, if you take a long list of all the weeds, quackgrass, Canada thistle, and there always was giant rag on the farm, all the list of them, I would call giant ragweed, if I put that in the balance beam on one side and all the other weeds on the balance beam on the other side, it might not even equal them. So I mean, it's worse than all the rest of the weeds are put together. I also think it's evolved significantly in the last 20 years and it's changed its habits. So Matt Liebman had a tremendous session an hour ago. So I'm just going to tell you what my experiences have been. But the biggest thing we're having here is just watch out, hit the wrong button over here in the sprayer. I hit the button on top, hit the button on the bottom. Oh, on the side, there we go. Okay, button 5, all right. We have organic crop rotation, basically of corn, soybeans, small grains, hay, and pasture, and followed that for a long time. One part of our farm at one time, our crop rotation was corn, soybeans, small grains, and hay, so between a 4 and a 5 year rotation. But at any rate, as the ragweed pressure continued to build, it has made it absolutely almost impossible for us to grow small grains and harvest it as a grain crop, which really, because we have a beef cow herd, we have a brood sow herd, we need bedding. So the growing of a crop that I can harvest for bedding has become a serious problem. So it's cut corn and soybean yields where it's a problem right in half, and destroyed small grain yields, and irrelevant of the time you plant in the spring. So don't kid yourself. There, as Matt Liebman says, there's no spring seeded annual that can keep up with this pest. It really is no joke. However, fall seeded, I'll talk about a little bit about, there are some possibilities with fall seeded annuals or perennials that are doing well. In my experience, no amount of rotary hoeing, cross dragging has reduced it where the pressure is heavy. Yeah, sure, we do that, but it has not been significant. I don't seem to be any effectiveness with flame weeding, even though I can control almost all the other weeds successfully with flame weeding. Giant ragweed, you can burn it black and it'll be just turn green in a few days. Thanks to some suggestions last spring, I did deep moldboard plow, and not very proud to say it, but did very slowly and very thoroughly deep plowed, and it did do some significant good last year. So we tried to bury some ragweed seeds as deeply as possible, and that is a strategy. I know some people may have some problems with doing that, but we're trying to get on top of things. I said I farmed for 43 years, and I'll tell you what the biggest mistakes I made was I waited until last year to start hiring a hand weeding crew. And it's an expensive situation. I did not want to do that. But so now I've got my attitude is that this is a war of attrition. And Gary Welch from Lansing, Iowa, is a longtime organic farmer, the oldest organic farm in Iowa. And I've been starting to listen to more what Gary Welch said, but hired hand weeding has been part of it. And we do have longer rotations, but that's not good enough. It works than that. So our previous crop rotation was corn, soybeans, small grains, hay, and pasture, and it might have been more than 1 year pasture. And in spite of that, giant ragweed was flourishing and getting worse. But we do have options because we have a cow herd. So in the small grains crop, in the last 10 years, we very often would windrow the small grains crop and have us entirely harvested for silage and use that for cow and calf feed. But the problem is that I don't have any bedding. So the problem is, as it got worse and worse, my bedding situation is getting worse and worse. So the crop rotation was becoming a real problem. And 2015, probably as bad as I had. So it was by 2015, I was at wit's end, not knowing what I was going to do. So did several different things that came out of some teleconference calls with Matt Liebman and a group of other organic farmers around the Midwest last year. And so now we're going to try a new crop rotation. So this is more like a 6 year rotation. So year 1, corn after pasture. Year 2, soybeans after corn. Year 3, a spring seeded bedding crop of either millet or oats, which is what we did last year. So we planted oats in the spring and took a bedding crop off, and I don't like oats as bedding, but we took it off as a bedding crop. Followed it with Japanese millet, even though we had a wet summer. We did get the millet harvested, 2 crops of millet as a bedding crop. And then in September, thanks to Sarah Carlson's suggestion, we signed a licensing agreement and we got a hybrid rye that we planted no-tilled after the millet in September, got it off to a nice start. And so the hybrid rye, it was overwintered now. And a fall seeded annual like that, it will overwhelm giant ragweed, and that's what they've been telling me. So in the summer of 2017, we're going to grain harvest this hybrid rye, and hopefully we can bale straw on the hybrid rye. And if that works, that's going to become an important part of our rotation. But then after we harvest the hybrid rye, then we're going to plant the hay. So it's a fall seeded hay crop. Will go on in the summer of 2017. And now that's a little risky, I know, and I've seen that fail, but that's part of the strategy that we're changing our crop sequence. So in year 5, it'll be hay from the fall seeding, and year 6, it'll be pasture for 1 to 2 years. So what we're doing here is we're changing a crop rotation that was entirely dependent upon, I should say entirely, largely dependent upon spring seeded annuals with hay and pasture in it, but it wasn't doing the job, to one now that really goes after ragweed. So what I'm after here is a war of attrition. I'm going out there and I'm working that ground in the spring and I'm killing a flush, working the ground again, killing another flush, planting millet. But in my experience, and Matt Liebman's really interesting to talk about the evolution of the emergence of ragweed. If you talked to me 10 years ago, I would say I can plant beans after a certain date in June and you have heavy ragweed pressure and I'd have a ragweed in the beans. Not true anymore. Now I could plant beans the 25th of June and I'll get heavy ragweed pressure. That's in soybeans. So, anybody experienced with Japanese millet? It's a very aggressive growing annual grass. You plant it in the warm soil. I'll tell you how millet has, and I got some pictures how ragweed has evolved. Because millet is about as aggressive as anything I know, and I'll show you what happens. I plant millet the 25th of June and had ragweed sail right over top of that. So this extended emergence of this pest is no joke. And this is what went on. So this is millet harvested for bedding, but look at the rag pressure, and that's planted the 25th of June. So it didn't go to seed there. But never kid yourself, 10 years ago I would have done the same thing, had no ragweed whatsoever, because the wood emerged that late in the summer. So it really, in my book, is an evolutionary monster, and I also think it's a monster of climate change, because our climate is absolutely changing. So that's the pressure that we're dealing with. So after we harvested the bedding crops, we did some different things. On part of the field we planted some crimson clover as a cover crop, and some places we planted tillage radish as a cover crop as well. So these are in some strips done last year just to disrupt the cycle, but we still had rag pressure in there, but it did not go to seed. Most of this field, 20 acres, is planted to hybrid rye, which we hope will become a part of our crop rotation. So, but also, I want to talk about crop rotation a little bit, and then it's supposed to be a roundtable. I want to share a couple quick things on cultivation, and then we'll go around the mic if that's okay with everybody. I've got a front mount cultivator, and I changed my cultivator so I have cutaway disc. And what Matt Liebman said earlier is so good, because this looks like pretty good control, and yet those soybean yields were cut in half with the ragweed pressure in the row. And this is a 2015 picture. And I'll show more about the cutaway disc. So I've got disc here that run right along the row, and will get you in about as close to the row as I can drive. And I've offset the seat on the tractor, so as I'm looking right over top of the row. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just a few things. But at the same time, I'm pulling a rear mount cultivator behind the front mount cultivator, and that's something I really like. But it is only about that 90% effectiveness rate, and getting the last 10% is a big, big deal. So, but I don't want to spend too much time, because this is mostly a roundtable discussion. So your inputs are really important, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go to roundtable. Yes?
So how many of these, how many
You can pass this around.
So how many acres are you talking in some of these plots or fields or?
The ragweed plot we did,
The ragweed control area is one of the worst areas on the farm. There's about 30 acres in that field. And that 30 acres, then I put 20 acres now is planted to hybrid rye. There were some other strips in there that we did crimson clover and just some fall seeded cover crops in there after we took a bedding crop off. But what after is a war of attrition. I'm going to let it germinate and kill it. I'm going to let it decay in the soil and kill it. The ragweed seed. Tillage and decay in the soil, and Matt Liebman tells me that tillage to encourage seedlings emergence is really, really an important thing. So you're trying to get everything possible to grow out there and then kill it. Yes?
What's the life of the ragweed seed in the soil?
Okay, Matt Liebman has talked earlier this morning, talked extensively about the good news is that it doesn't produce a lot of seeds per plant, and its seed viability, because of the large size seed with a lot of energy in it, is relatively low. Matt's got a huge amount of research on that. The good news is that it doesn't last long, but don't kid yourself. You've got to go at this as a war of attrition. I think of all the mistakes I made, not listening to Gary Welch earlier was a big one. So here's Gary Welch's strategy. You get on top of it one way, shape, form, or the other. With deep plowing, Welch doesn't do. We were successful in some areas to do that last year. You get on top of the situation, and then you go after it for no survivors. So the hand weeding crew is very expensive, but then we successfully took all of the rag out of both my corn and beans last year. I shouldn't say all. I think we're 99% last year because I hired this crew. But here's what Gary Welch is telling me. He says he started, it was costing him over $200 an acre for hand weeding, and then it was $100, and then it was $75, and now he's in that $30 to $50. But he says they come back every year because he says the hand weeding crews come back every year because this war goes on. You don't let it go to seed, because once you let it go to seed, the thing just it spikes right out of control. So I have to admit that all my strategies here were failing, and we have to have a new strategy. But in that new strategy is about everything we can think of, but that includes the fact that we have to have a multiple approach to this thing. But Gary Welch, I'm convinced, is 100% right in what he's saying about the effectiveness of reducing that weed seed bank. Yes?
So I was actually in a class with Matt this past spring, and we talked a lot about, again, ecologically based pest management and weed management and modeling a little bit. We say one thing is that all models are wrong, but some models are useful, right? So we kind of cobbled together a bunch of information based on some conversations with Tom.
I'll stand and pull you, Mike, and have a couple of
Yeah, conversations with Tom and Ron Roseman and some of the work. So Adam Davis and Matt built a small model in this chapter on organic weed management. And you didn't get to see the model in Matt's presentation. But there was an economic component as well, right? So you've got a number of individuals, adult individual ragweeds, right? And a labor cost, right? And as the number of individual ragweeds goes up, the labor cost goes up. So again, this is cobbled together, and what I want to emphasize more than anything else is that it gives a relative idea of what happens when you front load. Matt talked about front loading, labor costs, and energy into weed management, all right? So the best numbers I got, so you saw, I think, a map, like a heat map. Who was in Matt's session, the last session, if you could just raise your hand? There was kind of a heat map as seed bank densities, and the student from Minnesota did that. So we took some basic numbers, and I had a conversation with Ron, because he had the best numbers. He said, okay, when there was very low ragweed pressure, this is how much we were spending per acre. When there was moderate, this is how much we were spending. And when there's high, this is how much we were spending. So again, these are numbers cobbled together, and I want to get really impressed that these aren't absolute numbers. They kind of give a relative idea of what's going on. All right? So Ron had a crew of 10 people. He paid about $27 an hour, okay? Right? And we figured that their walking speed is about 3 miles per hour. Again, I'm making some very serious generalizations here, right? And that each walker is responsible for 3 interrows, okay? So even just to walk the field and not weed anything, just to be in the field, that cost is about $10 an acre, all right? And it goes up linearly from that. And that gives a basic idea. I don't want to show that as much, but I ran Matt and Adam's model, and I just wanted to show you that. Let's see if I can get you. Okay? So this is 10 years of running a model with these different time steps, and we see different growth with those economic numbers attached, okay? And this is what I want to look at, right? Is that we've got different levels of hand weeding control, all right? Yeah? Yeah. How's that?
Yeah.
Is that a little bit? Okay, so I want to emphasize, this is at 85% cultivation efficacy. So Matt showed some numbers that varied anywhere between about 68 and 90. All right, so I somewhat split the difference. And again, talking with growers, I got some numbers. Okay? So, and we're looking at 90% through 100% hand weeding efficacy. All right, 100% is you're spending as much as you possibly can, and you're being really diligent, paying a crew or doing it yourself really early on. Okay? Remember, this was $27 an hour. I answered one question, right? All right, and this is 90%. Okay? So over a 10-year period, with 90% control, this is how much you're spending on hand weeding. Okay? When you start to move up to 93%, it drops drastically. All right? And it drops even more as you go towards 100% control. Again, all I want this to emphasize more than anything else is that the importance of front-loading weed management, be it cultivation, be it hand walking, whatever it may be. Adam.
Yeah, and I think we have to stop thinking about weed management as an added-on cost. Weed management is an investment that you make in your farm. You make all sorts of investments in your farm, right? Proactive weed management is an investment, and this is something that in central Illinois, we're having really severe herbicide resistance problems. And so talking with people about thinking ahead, being proactive, over a 5-year period, you can be looking at a 10-fold difference in how much you have to spend on weed management if you're proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, I want to follow that, but I think this is a different world. Because I'm going back to earlier comments that if I take ragweed over here and all the other weeds in over here, you just name me a weed over there, I bet I can give me a strategy I'll get on top of it with. But rag has been driving me really nuts. So I think that you're right in what you're saying, but it is more applicable here than any place, because if I let the whole farm go to crabgrass, I wouldn't know how to get on top of that. And with all the different weeds, I can get on top of that this way, that way, whatsoever, but not here without getting on top of things and staying on top of things, because its ability to evolve and its strategies are more difficult to control with. So I think it's a different world with more of a loaded deck.
I think what I like about what Adam says, I think we need to be prospective in our weed management and think about what's happening down the line. And a modeling tool and talking with some researchers gives you a decent idea of, okay, what's going to happen. So Matt, again, talks a lot about blind empiricism. So every year you look at, okay, I'm doing this, I'm beating hard, and I'm working really hard, my cultivation's good, and yeah, there's a few plants, but I don't know what's going on. And I've heard a lot of farmers say that, over the last 3 years of working in the state. And if you don't start to think prospectively about how you're managing, about how sequence and competition, all these other factors can contribute to a robust weed management program, it's going to be, as Tom said, a kind of a losing battle. So it's really important to think holistically about weed management and think prospectively.
I have a couple of questions. Can you control ragweed with a corn knife or something, or do you have to pull the plant completely out of the ground?
I had the crew pull it completely out of the ground, so I didn't have them. They didn't use the corn knife. They were very hardworking. There were 2 different crews, and I was totally impressed. I was scared to death to start with.
The question really was,
You cut them or pull them is what we did.
Yeah, if they're big, you can't hardly pull them.
No, if it's too big, you couldn't pull them. But again, attack at dawn. What am I going to do next year? Earlier, smaller, maybe even 2 passes. It's a war of attrition. I mean, it's got to be a war of attrition.
And as far as costs, I've heard anywhere from 27 was the highest number that I had heard in my conversations. But it ran.
how do you get 4,000 in a couple of those years?
So this is total cost, right, over a given acre basis. And again, when I talked to the producer, this is for 10 people walking at $27 per person per hour, at 3 miles per hour, covering 3 roads in a 30-inch road space.
But in some of those years, you got $4,000, you can buy an acre of land.
Yeah, so what happens over time is that weed populations, right? So this is, if you look at the rotation, we've got row crop, solid seeded crop, right? So not in every year are those weeds going to produce a ton of seeds. Right? Sometimes you're going to be terminating earlier in that solid seeded crop year. And then remember that they're building up in those row crop years. So certain years costs are going to be higher and certain years costs are going to be lower.
$4,000 to control.
I've heard of numbers way higher than that. I mean, if you talk with organic producers about hand weeding costs,
Oh, okay, so they're producing a higher value crop.
sure, yeah. But again, we're moving into an area here where in 2 crop rotations, we're really exacerbating the kind of selection pressures we're placing on these kind of weeds. If you're organic or you're conventional, it's going to start to not matter eventually. And it's going to put conventional producers really in a bind as to what their tools are that they can use. And I know it doesn't look economically viable to hand weed, but we're at a point now where there may not be other options.
And
If you talk with
the southern part of the state, they have to hand weed bent palmer amaranth. They're going out, they've learned that they can't kill it when it's 3-leaf with spray, so they're taking all of the palmer amaranth out by hand down in Alabama.
Jack, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that Tom pointed out, we emphasize more, if you don't like to spend the money to hand weed, don't grow so much row crop. Like, you change your rotation. I think that's a big benefit. If you're keeping them from going to seed, they're germinating but not going to seed. Well, then you don't have the expense of the hand weeding. Maybe you can't afford to grow soybeans. I'm not going to grow soybeans on some fields until I get the weed pressure under control. Just a little example of what I experienced this last year. I went to expense and spent a bundle on hand weeding the soybean field. And then in late June, it got hailed out. Lost the whole crop. I never replanted that late, 1st and 2nd of July, I planted soybeans. Well, the giant ragweed wasn't there. It was basically, there wasn't any there. But I had weeds that I never had problem with before. I never had pigweed like that. Something about plenty of moisture, and I had pigweed in those weeds, and those soybeans. And then luckily it was a late fall. If it had been an early frost, I didn't get as early a variety as I wanted to. I got what was available. It was a 2.0. I planted the 1st and 2nd July. And luckily it made it. But what I'm going to do this next year, I think you said fall seeded crops. They're important. I think winter wheat. One problem I had winter wheat before, I always tried to grow it after a row crop. It got too late. I think winter wheat should be planted earlier. I think late September is a good time to plant it. If it's going better, I think it's going to produce better. And then, question I got from the group here, I planted winter wheat after alfalfa. Now, normally you get spring seed, like clover or something there. Even though I planted it after alfalfa, I probably have nitrogen there. Would it pay me to put some red clover in there? I'm thinking it probably would. But I want opinions on that. Is it going to help for the nitrogen? Is it going to help weed control? I guess I'm asking a question there, and I'll pass this on. I'm taking enough of your time.
I wouldn't know how to answer that.
Anybody else got an opinion?
Oh, I can't address that question. I got more questions.
No, go ahead, Jack.
I actually have a series of minor questions that I'd like to pose.
No?
First of all, how late in the year can you cut or uproot or mow ragweed to good effect, or at some point after it's set seed, doesn't do any good, you just let it go?
Matt talked about that this morning. It's about September is when the viable seed is there.
Okay.
If that answers your question. And he talked about how, but its seed matures about the same time regardless of when it emerged. If I remember what Matt said this morning, everybody was in that section?
So it set seeds really quickly to
Yeah, but they're not viable till about 1st September.
1st of September.
Yeah, but Matt's data on that's huge. And
Okay.
that session this morning was almost an information overload.
Okay, well, here, I got a couple other minor questions.
No.
Do worms move the seed deeper into the ground?
Somebody said does.
Could somebody answer that for me quick?
Yeah,
I got several more. They do.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, this is more work out of Ohio State, and then we did some of it in Illinois and across in our central region. But common earthworm in a low-till system anyway comes out, grabs the seed, and brings it down into its midden. And the thing about that, it can work two ways for a giant ragweed. One, if you've got like 50 seeds cached down there in the midden, only one of those is going to survive. So in some ways it depletes the seed bank, but it also protects them from seed predation. So one of those seeds is going to make it. So you can think it's kind of a win-win. If you've got a lot of seed predators on your farm, it's probably worth it to not be tilling too much. If you don't have a lot of seed predators on your farm, you probably want to let those ragweeds, the earthworms, take those seeds down and cache them.
And I should add, Matt, I didn't see you sitting there. Did we answer the question that Jack asked a second ago about seed viability, about September 1, regardless of emergence? Was that correct from your session?
Yeah,
Okay.
late summer into the fall is when the seeds mature.
Okay, here's exactly why I asked that question, is that sometimes you have a stand of giant ragweed on the edge of the field, and it's always been my contention that in November, it's better just to not do anything with it rather than mow it down and smash the seeds into the ground and, you know, and keep them there. This is a kind of a minor point.
There's some organisms that'll climb up the plants and eat the seeds on the plant, but most of them are on the ground.
Okay,
We're better off leaving those seeds close to the soil surface.
Okay, and related to this again, do birds eat and consume and make the seed not viable?
Good question.
Yes,
They make them not viable. They digest them.
yeah, I think they digest.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, and that'd be another reason not to mow down,
Well,
mow them down on the edge
many
of the
of the
field.
seeds are consumed by mice, and the mice don't hibernate. They're active all winter. So a day like this, when you have open fields and the mice haven't hibernated, they'll go out and forage for as many seeds as they can find. So we did a whole series of experiments across corn and soybean fields in central Iowa, and we looked at times during the winter when mice would be active. And they come out of burrows in the fields, and on a clear day when there's not much snow cover, they'll eat as many seeds as they can find. So having the plants drop the seeds on the soil surface is probably better from the standpoint of rodent consumption of seeds than leaving them stand up.
Okay.
Mice will climb up plants.
I got a couple other minor points about this. Is the giant ragweed, is it somehow tied to the overuse of beef manure? Is this a weed of high fertility?
Oh, yes. In my experience, definitely yes.
Basically.
It likes high fertility, humidity. It doesn't do well in the drought at all.
Yeah.
I think oats will outrun it in the drought.
Okay, and where is the science on soil pH, micronutrients, and all that kind of thing as to what kind of qualities in the soil either encourage or discourage ragweed? I remember hearing rumors about,
Yeah,
well, if you get your calcium
There's a lot
down,
of
what's
literature and
that?
discussion about that, and I'm not going to tell you it's right or wrong. But what I will tell you is the single most important thing you can do is to enhance the growth of the crop. So you should create conditions in the soil that are conducive to rapid crop growth. And if you think that you get good weed control by starting your crops, you may be disappointed.
We've been looking for that silver bullet of what micronutrient we could apply to address the condition for a long time, but it's not on the horizon apparently. Well, this is kind of, I had an observation 10 and 15 years ago when I looked at farms that newly transitional fields, they would have ragweed along the edge. Oh, that ragweed's been there forever. The farmer would tell me. As soon as I went organic, it moved right into the crop. And I think that might have been related to the worms moving. And, you know, as you get better worms in your field, one of the bad side effects is that it moved that. Oh, they only move it a few inches. Okay.
Come out of rabbit. No, I think
Okay.
you know, when ragweed drops its seeds, it drops it in about a 10-meter radius, and then next one they drop it further. So you just have to stop that encroachment by blowing the murder.
So that theory didn't. That's a theory we were working with 15 and 17 years ago.
But Jack, I think the best encroachment approach is a cow herd. Beef cows will go and they clean it up. They like eating giant rag. And if you look at the technical information on it, it's not a bad silage. So cattle like to eat it.
That was my next question. Do we have, outside of your experience, do we have any, this almost seems like a tactic of giving up, but on timing and palatability, when the ragweeds stick in your corn, I mean, have we done any,
I don't know if like in a fall corn harvest, when the ragweeds mature, it's probably negative, with corn silage harvest, I mean. But in the summer, if you harvest it when it's lush, and I think if you look at the data, I saw it someplace on the feed value of different weeds, it's pretty good.
and if you're doing that before seed set, you're.
Oh yeah, it's summertime.
It'd be nice to see a little feed palatability and.
We get high yield.
It'd be nice to get a little science on that too. But once again, it just feels like you're conceding and giving up, but I think it's something that we should learn more about.
But if you're in the border areas, what's better to control it than a cow?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I might have more, but, yeah, those kind of minor questions compared to the big crop rotation mechanical control, but, I thought it needed to be added to the discussion.
You have any trouble? Did you have any trouble finding a hand weeding crew?
I went to what Gary Welch told me, and he said that he had been to a good relationship, and it was exactly what happened. I was worried to start with, kind of a kick out to start with. I was worried about the whole thing. The day was over with, when they got done, I went, gee, this wasn't bad. And then I had him come back, and I wasn't worried all second time around, and he wasn't worried either. He says, he just mailed me a check. I promise you I mailed a check the very next day too. And then the check said, you were to return in 2017. This time you come back. So it's the old trust control. I was worried to start with, but after a while I lost my fear. And they worked very, very hard.
I can address that a little bit. No.
If you get a crew that's used to doing farm work, they're in between corn detasseling and blueberry raking or whatever else they do, then you're gonna get a hardened, experienced crew. I mean, it is possible to get crews out there that aren't hardened and experienced farm laborers. That is possible. But these guys that do that kind of work, and just add a little something. I used to do that kind of work when I was younger. And, but, so it can go wrong, but, like I say, if you got an experienced farm worker crew, they're so good at it and they work so hard, it's just amazing, just absolutely amazing.
I mean, there's a few of you I know around here that have hired hand weeding crews. Maybe you could share where you found that, or if there's a, okay.
Yeah, so in my discussions, the one that's come up a lot is Deanna Walker's out of Storm Lake, Iowa. And they're a very well-respected crew. It's not cheap, but they do really good work. And I've been all over Iowa at this point, talking to different organic growers. And their name has come up multiple times. Deanna Walker's out of Storm Lake, Iowa.
And interestingly enough, I asked their foreman, and he said, organic farmers got us started. And he says, we take care of the organic farmers first. So it's kind of interesting, because he said we had that for a long time. Big question back there?
When you mentioned not cheap, what is that, what are you saying with that?
$27 an hour per man.
And that's the upper limit.
Yep.
There was a gentleman that stopped at my place 2 Februarys ago, and he came to my door. He was Hispanic, and he had a business card. He was driving a state of Iowa emblem on the side of his car, and his name was Antonio, was his first name, but he works with Iowa Workforce. He had a state of Iowa business card, and I think he's a controller. I'm sorry, I don't have the information here in front of me, but he hooked me up with, he goes around and makes sure that these working people have their green cards, so to speak, and that they're bonded for liability. And I think he's the contact person, and he'll put you in touch with people that are in different parts of the state. I got hooked up with a company out of Marshalltown. Safari Harvesting was their name. I worked with them for 2 years. They're not as expensive as that, but the first year they had an introductory of $15 an hour, and then she told me next year it's going to be $17.50. But I know they do work for the big seed corn companies, and the rate goes up for those guys. So I'm thankful they're trying to work with us to keep their labor down.
But I would add that the best way to keep the labor down is go back to Gary Welch's comment, is that it's a part of a strategy. And if really bad ragweed pressure situations take really different changes, but then long term, they're part of it. My intention is to have weed whacking crew back every single year. And just like Welch says, I think Gary, my book, would you not agree with me that Gary really pioneered how to get on top of this thing, in my opinion.
Now, you mentioned Gary Welch, but he told me one thing that surprised me. He's a firm believer in cereal rye. He'll tear up an alfalfa field in the fall, haul manure, and then he'll seed cereal rye, even though it's going in corn. Most people think of cereal rye not being in front of corn. He says he doesn't think it's a problem. He gets enough benefit out of the cover crop. That's one more thing that Gary does. He thinks it helps his overall wheat control. That basically he uses cereal rye before everything.
Anybody else? Well, and then a person's got to consider how heavy the weed pressure is. If you think you can get yourself and some grandkids or something, and if there's just a few, and you can, it's more walking than pulling it, you can get through it really early and get it, or really late. You don't necessarily always need to have the big high-priced crew, and that's another tool you got, but you gotta.
It's true, but if you look at rag and Canada thistle, it is really interesting, because a lot of people complain about Canada thistle. A great Canada thistle story I should tell you, because my father-in-law died a year ago, but he farmed his entire life. Anyway, my dad grew up, I farmed, and my father-in-law first time came up our farm, he looked at thistles out there and says, hook me a spray of Canada thistle. And I said, Artie, I says, my dad started spraying Canada thistle in 1945 with Nate's Farm Law, and we sprayed with every type of 2,4-D known to man, Banville, atrazine, atrazine oil. Take a pick. I go through a long list, and we still got all kinds of Canada thistle. He looked at me and says, Fayette County says, we sprayed our Canada thistle once, they all died. So, it's really interesting how weeds can be different in places. But we don't have much more thistle pressure than we had 20 or 30 years ago, and if it's bad, I know how to get rid of them. I just have to declare war on them in black earth policy, drag roots up surface and starve them to death. I'll get on top of it. But rag is a different world. And so that evolution, or quackgrass, same thing. Yeah, good, Daryl.
Yeah, we've battled with ragweed back since our inception of farming in '91. We took and started farming ragweed infested fields that the sprays didn't work on. So when we transitioned, my dad said, "You got to be crazy," But we started hiring 2 Spanish families that came up and started dairying in 2000, and they've packed a pretty good amount of Spanish families right in Dickeyville, Dubuque, Hazel Green is where a lot of them live. They even migrated over to Darlington. But we've had weed pullers for 17 years, and all I can say is we started paying them like $9 an hour. We paid them more than what they wanted because we wanted them to stay. And now they pull for that whole group. There's 40 of us right there in Grant County that are, most of them are Organic Valley dairy farmers, but there's a lot of cash grain guys too that we pull them in, and now we're paying them like $13, $14 an hour. And we have one leader that takes care of all the hours, and we manage them really well. My son actually is in charge, and being we brought him in and started him, why we got preference because we've helped them get that business going. And they milk for farmers now, so they work from 5 in the morning. You'll be driving down the road if I leave early, and I can see the weed pullers out in fields at 5:15 in the morning. It's just light enough to see they're pulling because they can only pull till milking time. The crew, and there's 19, 20 of them in the crew. So they're pretty dedicated, and ours work pretty reasonable because they have other jobs. That's not their sole income. And then they come back in the evening and pull for a couple hours, and they do a good job. But it's just like you said, getting them back for the cleanup because, I pulled weeds for a long time in my fields, and I had both hips replaced in '09 from doing that. I'll tell you that right now. So I pulled weeds, especially in my seed crops. I pulled everything, mustard, all the ragweeds, and my kids and myself pulled them clean. So there was 6 of us did our first years on organic farming when we only had 70, 80 acres of row crops, because we did a lot of small grains too, because we had a good market for it. But, having them come back and doing the cleanup pays, because some of those fields that we've been just hell on, and we took and went back and pulled the escapes ourselves because the Mexicans were just too busy, and we've made great strides in that. And like you say, putting that rye down, and like 7, 8 years ago, I think it's 8 years now, in '09, it was '09, we built our rotation around how do we get rid of ragweed. So, we're a corn 1 year. When you got ragweed, you got to get corn 1 year only. We've got about 3 fields we'll run beans in that next year. Then we go to oats, and then we go 2 years of alfalfa. And we're aggressive alfalfa cutters because we got dairy guys. So we take 4 crops. The first year it's true alfalfa. The next year we only take 3, and in August we'll put a cover crop of radish, Sudan grass, oats, peas, soybeans, some buckwheat. We plant that in August, and that gets waist high by November. Those fields have very few ragweeds left, but we've spent a lot of money getting it under control. And that's what it's all about. It's not just keeping them Mexicans coming and those pullers coming every year. We seen right through that was going to be trouble, because everybody's going to go through that. The whole community of organic farmers just went through that. So we were pretty instrumental in helping Southwest Wisconsin work on them. But, and I worked for Organic Valley for 5 years, but that's my first thrust when I walk into a farm. That's my first question, because then that way I'll know how successful he's going to be. Because if he won't pull his ragweed, he's in trouble. He lets them come. Everybody builds their weed bank. No, but they just weren't there. You build your weed bank. So that's how, I've handled it, and I still handle it that way today, getting guys to get pullers and crews, and I don't care what state it's in. I even help them write the letter. I'll take a piece of paper and say, wanted, organic farmers need weed pullers. Put your name and put some cuts in there and take them to Spanish restaurants or Tex-Mex, anywhere. And you'd be surprised how quick they can get a crew together, but you got to pay them well. You got to treat them like a human being. We paid ours really well. We gave them gas cards. We gave them Hy-Vee food cards. As those mothers were having kids, they ate organic food. We got a pretty good community of them that are really, they believe in what we're doing. So, that's a good feeling too, just to get somebody in there and use them. We didn't use them. We took care of them, and they appreciate it. And we made good friends with them. When I leave, they watch my farms. That's worth a lot too. And I pay them. Give them food coupons, give them, go get gift cards for them at the grocery stores that they like to shop at. And, that's part of the lifestyle of being an organic farmer, is whoever is with you, treat them like they're with you.
This old expression, "was good for the goose is good for the gander," and that's about the best. That's very, very good.
That's one thing I am concerned about with these crews. And maybe somebody else knows this, but like with the Deanda crew, do you know how much the workers are actually getting compared to the people at the top? I tried to find that out, and no one was talking. So I don't know if anybody else got that.
No, our crew didn't speak any English. The foreman could speak a little English, but no, I couldn't communicate with him.
And I also would say that it was, for me personally, it was kind of a pride issue when getting them in. I thought I was doing a pretty good job of getting out there and doing weed control, but clearly if you're not getting everything like this crew is doing, you're just spinning your wheels. Because I always would have good intentions of getting out into the soybean fields and even in the corn and getting all the ragweed possible, but it's never happened, 100%. So.
Daniel, while you have the mic back there, maybe you could talk a little bit about how you changed your rotation, or what you're doing rotation-wise to get at ragweed.
Well, we're starting to also do, do the a couple of years of small grains testing that, and then with a couple of years of hay, alfalfa after that, trying to break that cycle. Just starting that process to see if that's going to start to control the ragweed.
I'd like to ask Matt a question. As far as evolution of a plant, I think this plant is evolving faster than other plants are, from what I've seen of it. And especially where 10 or 15 years ago, it wouldn't emerge in mid-June. Now I think I can get a great flush 1st of July. Are other plants showing similar evolutionary characteristics to this?
Yes. So herbicide resistance is a great example of rapid evolution. And it's happening. You have populations of water hemp and Palmer amaranth that are resistant to 5 different modes of action of herbicides. So, you know, that's a serious threat to conventional farming because we're not coming up with new modes of action of herbicides. And when you look at shifts in the population characteristics with regard to emergence timing, you know, it's not surprising that if you have a strong selection pressure against a population of giant ragweed that emerges nearly synchronously in late March and early April, that you're going to find those individuals that emerge later and that are successfully able to contribute their seeds to the seed bank and subsequent generations, that they're going to become a higher proportion of the population.
Okay, Matt, as I understand it, evolution is driven by 3 things. It's driven by natural selection, genetic mutation, and sexual reproduction.
So,
So
imagine out in the world, you have a population like we have here in this room where not everybody's the same. And we differ in terms of the rate at which we develop, our susceptibility to various stresses. Okay, so that variation occurs already in weeds. And what evolution is a shift in the proportion of a population that's composed of a particular set of genotypes. So what you do when you apply a herbicide or tillage timing or a particular kind of control technique is you exert pressure on that population, and those individuals within it that have the ability to survive and reproduce differentially contribute their genes to subsequent generations. That's all that's happening. So whether it's a herbicide or a group of herbicides or the timing of your tillage to prepare a seedbed, you're exerting a selection pressure which is like a filter through which the population has to pass. And those individuals that can make it through don't contribute their genes to subsequent generations, and those that do become more prevalent in the population.
Matt and I were talking about this after the last session. Like if you drive down the road, you see where there's a lot of giant rag in a ditch, and they sprayed, and they killed it in the field, but as you get to the ditch, you'll have sick ragweed, and then not quite so sick ragweed, and then healthy ragweed. It'd be just a great transition in there, and so who's going to survive and produce genes for the next population of ragweed?
Yeah, so just imagine that you're applying a filter, and some things make it through the filter and some things don't. And the way you construct that filter, whether it's with herbicides or tillage timing or any other control technique, determines shifts in the composition of the population. Okay, so if it turned out that 3/4 of us here were susceptible to some particular pathogen and 1/4 of the population wasn't, and that pathogen showed up, those people that survive and reproduce are going to become more dominant in the population. And that's
But that also adds value to the fact that some years we kill them with the cow, and some years kill them with the tractor, and some years kill them with the cultivator shovel, some years pull them out by hand, and some years all kinds of different strategies. Every one of those disrupts that steady evolution, where if you only use one strategy, you just built any evolution.
Right. So a diverse set of stress factors and a diverse set of factors that kill weeds is going to be more effective over the long term at preventing the selection for particular genotypes that are successful.
But that also shows that my 5-year rotation was unsuccessful. It was the assumption that that was a good enough crop rotation, which I had for a heck of a long time.
If most of what you were growing were annual crops that were planted in mid-spring or late spring, you're not really exerting a very different set of selection pressures, right? When you have hay, that helps, but if it's not sufficient to overcome the buildup in the seed bank that occurred in your farm with your spring planted crops, you're never getting ahead of it. So like I tried to show earlier, it's a numbers game. And if what's going in is greater than what's coming out, you know what the outcome over the longer term is going to be. And you have to disrupt that balance between what goes in and what goes out if you're on the wrong side of the balance.
What about the crop roller with a heavy, crop roller? Cereal rye and the crop roller like Francis, I think he's done that. Have guys tried that with heavy fields with heavy ragweed? I never have. Has anybody done that?
Up at the University of Wisconsin, they've done that cover crop roll down no-till is what it's called, CCRMT. That's the acronym they've got on it. And they've done, they've made great strides in that. I should go down and get my computer and load it. Or stop by the Organic Valley booth. I'll send you the PDF on it. They got 6-page PDF of where they're measuring now how much dry matter you're going to roll down, and that's giving you the weed control. So they've come a long way on that system, and it's working well. They have a few ragweeds broke through their plot, and I've been at that plot 3 out of 5 years that they're working this. So they've come a long way because they're measuring the dry matter in areas where they get breakthroughs and where they don't. So they're upping the seeding rate. They're pinning the dates when it was planted and the dates when it went into anthesis to roll it. So they've got some really good numbers to help you get that right.
And that's a great thing, but also, if there's any message here, there's no one solution, and there really shouldn't be. So when the rags do manage to survive in that, you want to go out and get every one of them. Because that's the seed bank or whatever's evolved around that.
You can't let them go. You know, we went out when we first started, here's something I might save you from doing, is, we went out and got like a 22-foot field cultivator and put stops in it. And when we did our primary tillage, we did that as early as we could get in there comfortably without compacting. And a lot of it was wellboard plowing. In some of those fields, I had a cover crop on in 1988, fall of '88. That's how long I've cover cropped it in the Dickeyville bottoms, and everybody laughed. They said, them ragweeds, you'll never kill them, So, but I did by pulling them mainly. But then first couple of years, we went and a ragweed would come up. It'd get about 7 inches tall. They come early and they come fast. As soon as you warm that soil up, they just come. And we said, we're just going to keep germing them out. But, after the first year, we found that every one that we buried and tore in two came. And I've got some really good pictures of that, actually. And
but that would drop down the seed bank, wouldn't it, Matt?
No. Well, it would drop down the seed bank but then you had to pull everything that you doubled. Because if you tore it in two, the roots would come right off the stem and it would grow. If it had any light, if it was buried completely, it wouldn't grow. But if that leaf was out of the ground, it's coming. And you could pull that leaf up, and there'd be 5, 8 little white root hairs on there propagating from a stem. And, we just kept going and going and going, and pretty soon we just had a mess. We spent like $200 and some an acre pulling that field.
Yeah, there's a question in the back end.
I wasn't here when you started, but is there a mineral imbalance in the soil that drives that population? I don't need an answer, Scope. I'm just looking for an answer on if a mineral imbalance.
Question, is there a mineral imbalance in the soil?
You can drive across the road and
I have no data. Matt has any data. I wouldn't have any idea.
I mean, you can drive across the road and not have giant ragweed like you have in the field next to it.
We wish there was.
Well, I'm asking, because we all talk about soil balance, and, like dandelions growing in your yard, they're short calcium. If you go out there and dump calcium around them, it minimizes your dandelion population. Because every weed's trying to recycle a nutrient, right?
Yeah.
So I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I'll say what I said earlier, that the single most important thing you can do with regard to nutrient balance is to ensure good growth conditions for your crop. Because your crop, its competitive ability against the weeds, has an enormous impact on the weed problems over the longer term. So if you can ensure good conditions with regard to fertility or balance of nutrients within the soil to enhance crop growth, you're probably going to do more to manage your weeds than if you monkey around with the balance of cations or nutrients directly. You don't want to starve your crop, and you don't want to create imbalances for the crop seeking an optimal solution for weed control. So the way I look at it is enhance the fertility of the soil to encourage rapid growth of your crops. And if you do that, I think you're going to be pleased with the outcome with regard to weed management.
Thank you.
Back to what you were saying about cutting a plant in two. Were you noticing that it was actually producing a viable seed? That it had enough energy to... because I've seen that too, where there was regrowth after...
It was growing from the stem. The stem
right.
Roots. It didn't need a seed.
But...
It's the same plant. But is the plant that was cut, that grew, produced seed? You know, I've never seen a ragweed that hasn't produced seed and it's not big enough. You know, not, you know, I mean, just, that's a good question. You know, I never did the research where I walked up, we pulled them. You know, we're pretty true to pulling ragweeds because we know that we're just gonna lose it. Or we'll lose ground. You know, we spend all this time and all this money in our rotation and in our fertility program. That farms that we started on have been certified organic since '88. That's 26 years with a certificate on. There we go. I balance my soils. I take soil tests every 3 years, sometimes 2. Did some plant tissue sampling. All of it's high. You know, I put humates on, buried cover crops, tried calcium all over the row, and you know, wide open and through the insecticide boxes. Even drilled them out with a 1/2-inch bit. You know, and make 2 rounds. You back put 50 pounds in a unit. So you know, I put on lots of different things. I never found one thing that stopped it. Whatever corn likes, ragweed likes. That's what I found.
To Daniel's question, Matt, is that just the amount of the number of heat units left when that ragweed regrows? Does it just need a number of heat units left to get to maturity and produce seed, or how would you go about figuring that out?
So the question is there enough heat units left when it regrows from having been trimmed off?
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of weeds respond to changes in photoperiod. And what you're seeing is that they start to produce seed, regardless of size, when the number of daylight hours drops below a certain critical point, right? So it's different weeds work different ways, but it wouldn't surprise me if giant ragweed starts to set seed in late summer and early fall as a function of differences in the amount of daylight. So you may have small plants producing seed, you may have large plants producing seed, and you may have fewer seeds on the smaller plants, but again, you don't want to let seed go into the ground if you can prevent that from happening.
Well, Matt, I'd like to ask you the question. In conventional agriculture, when rag starts to emerge in the middle of summer, that rag is pretty big when it pokes over top of the crop canopy. Then herbicides aren't going to be very effective because it'll be a very tall plant to start with before it even shows up.
Well, plants that emerge later are typically subject to more competition from the crop and are probably going to be less effective in producing seeds.
But they'll still produce seeds and make a new plant that wants to grow that way.
Yeah.
So it's possible 10 years from now to see giant rag be a July disaster area. That doesn't show up until July and that comes like crazy all over the place.
You're going to see fewer giant ragweeds emerging successfully and overtopping a corn canopy if they're coming up in late June and July than the ones that came up early on. So delaying the emergence of giant ragweed is a desirable thing from the standpoint of reducing seed production, but you are still going to get some seed production and the population is going to maintain itself. So, I mean, it's the less than perfect solution for the weed. Germinating later is less desirable than germinating earlier if it can compete with the crop from earlier emergence. But if it has to survive, the later emerging seedlings that can still produce seeds will maintain the population.
Yeah, did I hear you correctly say that it'll actually photosynthesize sunlight from every single part of the plant?
Yeah, that's correct. And actually the reproductive parts of the plant, including the seeds that are developing, are photosynthetic.
And that's really unusual.
Well, it's really well equipped.
Yeah.
So let's find a market for it.
Yeah. That's a good cattle feed.
Yeah, maybe this isn't appropriate, I just raise cattle and have them on pasture, but if your wife ever really gets mad at you, Tom, just have her send you down to my pasture, because I've got a farmer with a black walnut plantation, and all that grows underneath there is giant ragweed, and it's on a slope, and you can't walk in there in the fall because there's so much giant ragweed seed on the ground, it's slippery.
Wow.
But the timing of the grazing, I've grazed half of it once, and I needed an extra hour or two in the afternoon. I said, I'm going to throw them in that black walnut, in June or something. And it was pretty much done then. The sod came, strong enough, knocked back the weeds long enough. So now I got half of it in ragweed and the other half not.
Were you up to?
So there's another option. If you've got a bunch of growers in an area that all have a ragweed problem, I mean, the reason that you have to keep on coming in is because you're spreading the seed across your fields with the combine. And so for those of you who weren't in that session this morning, there's a new implement for harvest weed seed control called Harrington Seed Destructor. We've got one down in Urbana, Illinois. And it's expensive. But it's not expensive if you shared it amongst 10 growers. And this destroys, so we've looked at it with 9 different species, destroys everything from common water hemp up to cocklebur, including giant ragweed. So rather than your harvester becoming, an efficient weed seed dispersal device, it's a weed seed destructing device, and it's destroying more than 99% of the seeds that go through it. It has a cage mill in it. And so I have a toe-behind model. My toe-behind model cost $180,000. You don't want to be spending that. But there's an integrated model now that's $100,000. And if you divided that amongst 10 growers, you might be able to afford it if you had a giant ragweed issue like this. But basically, within 3 years, it'll be done. You'll be done with giant ragweed.
Mount on the combine.
Yeah, you plumb it in.
Well, I'll pass the microphone to this gentleman here. I had a question.
You lose some seeds through the head.
Sure, you're going to have some shatter ahead of it, and you'll probably have some selections of early dispersal, but you'll be getting enormous amounts of part of the problem that you have is picking it out with the hand cream. If you're driving on the road or just combine, you're going to end up sowing it over your whole field.
Go ahead, your question.
You were thinking about going clear up to a 6-year rotation, or was it a 5-year?
Well, 5 to 6 if I want another extra year of pasture. Yes.
Well, this is outside the box thinking, but weeds have been a curse since the beginning of time. And there's a biblical principle that I've been contemplating, and that's you're supposed to let the land rest for every 7th year. And I haven't done the economics of it yet, but what I'm hearing here is someone shared that they almost $10,000 spent on over the course of what was that?
This is, again, this one will show relative differences in if you control how much you're paying over 10 years.
Okay.
So the idea is the less you control early on, and the less diligent you are, the more money you're going to spend over a long period of time.
Well, I like to push the easy button in weed control, but I wonder if the economics would be there to just set aside 1/7 of your acres every year and put a cover crop mix on it. Just let the land rest, and you could use it to control weeds by either mowing or hand weeding. Maybe the economics are there. I mean, if we're already looking at a 6-year rotation, well, what's one more Plus, you're building the soil, and you don't look at it as a weed control cost, but a complete enhancement.
Yeah, it goes back to something Gary Zimmer said, is that it's a smart idea to take a part of the farm every year and do something really different with it. And it's really a good strategy, and then be very targeted where you do that strategy.
I think we're running out of time, but if you want to talk to me afterwards, there's a journal called Small Farms Journal, and there's a pair of farmers in Beech Grove, Pennsylvania, the Nordells, and they have a system called extensive weed management, where they're in effect doing exactly what you're talking about. So if you're interested, I can share the article with people, and I can get it to PFI and scan it out. Because it is an interesting approach, but again, you're putting land out of production, and the economics of that, I think, are, in row crops anyway, a little bit untested at this point.
All right, just, I remember after I was certified, or just got certified, I bought a flamer, you know, because I was just determined to get to the bottom of that ragweed. So I took and I planted a 19-acre field, like, the 15th. I tilled it a couple times, you know, to germ the weeds out, and I planted about 3.5 inches deep, because I talked to a lot of my older farmers that dealt with ragweed, but not a lot, because they had pasture and they left it in hay a lot longer. As we tighten up those rotations, we're exposing ourselves to that weed. We know that. So I took that flamer and I burned as hot as I could. You know, when I went out and about 5 days, I went out there and I burnt as hot as I could. I had the pressure up to 60 and creeping along about 3 miles an hour. So I was just smoking that dirt. You know, I mean, you could just see it just baking. You know, and I thought, wow, I bet that's going to help. You know, so I kept watching the corn, and maybe a few days later, I seen some ragweed starting to come, little leaves start, that first little leaf coming. So the corn wasn't quite up yet, because 3.5 inches is pretty deep. It's pretty deep. So I took and flamed it again. Same heat, same thing. And, you know, it melted it right down. Next afternoon, I went out there that same afternoon. I left the machine parked right in the field, because I wasn't going to take it out of there. And it was a brand new, nice TWC, thermal weed control system. Came from the sand country up in Wisconsin, that group of guys that built those first ones. And then the corn emerged, and the ragweed kept coming too. Even though it was melted off, that leaf shoved up. And I took and did it again, and just fried the corn. And the ragweed it kept coming. I could not stop that. And I figured I had over $60 an acre spent in fire. I know I can, you know, I knew I could pull it for that and not have my equipment and labor. So I 3 or 4 years later, I sold my flamer, because I get good with the rotary hoe. The rotary hose, you know, we learned fast back then. You learn faster at weedy crops, and I didn't want that. So, you know, that's a good story too. So if somebody's thinking about doing that, you know, there's my history with that.
All right, well, thanks everybody for the great discussion. This was really good. We're going to break for lunch now, so that's going to be served out here in the atrium area. All right.